this time on shift points, I make Dad really uncomfortable. I make him talk in front of the camera. So less than 12 hours ago, it was nearly 60 degrees outside, and now it's snowing. So at the end of the last video, I told you guys that you were gonna see a lot less of me because Dad was gonna do some filming while I was gone on a business trip. That didn't happen, so now you're stuck with seeing more of me this time. So yesterday, we got parts in, so we had to replace an order to Classic Industries for some more parts that we needed. One being the hood latch for the hood. So we have the hood, it has the spring and the pin and everything, but we actually needed the physical latch for to lock the hood down. We had to get there's some supports that go from the firewall to out to the fenders, just to give a little bit more bracing to add support here to the fenders, and a handful of other things, tail light brackets, license plate brackets, stuff like that. So whenever we got the parts yesterday, Dad got them put on this morning, figured out kind of how these go. So these supports, as you see, they bolt in two spots here into this bracket. This bracket came with these support bars. This goes here, it's threaded on this end and run all the way back here to the firewall and bolt in here. Luckily we hadn't, whenever we clearanced the firewall, when Dad clearanced the firewall for this engine, we actually didn't get up into these threaded inserts on where these rods go right here. So you can see they just bolt in right there. And everything still clearances everything on the LS too. So that works out good because the fenders themselves are just supported here at the radiator cradle, and then actually where the physical, the bolt connection is here to the cab of the truck also. So these, while not like 100% necessary, it definitely add a lot of extra support and keep the fender from trying to push down or kind of flop around out here as you go down the road. But whenever we got it in, the filter actually wasn't on when he put this support in for the intake tube, and you can see that if you look back down here at our brace that was attached to the inner fender, you can see there's a gap here now. So this was coming out at a 90-degree angle. It was flat, sorry, it was flat, coming flat out of the intake and then turned 90 into the end of the throttle body, coming out flat, and the filter was sitting somewhere, probably midpoint of the filter was sitting about right here. Well, now that this rod's here, of course, that's the dead center of where we needed it to be. So luckily so far it looks like we're going to be able to just rotate this up, and all that'll have to do is take this support that we built and just extend it and get it down here into the threaded inserts that we already have on the inner fender. So that's one thing that we noticed with these parts. It took a little while to get this in place where it needed to be for the latch. So the hood latch on these trucks is right here. You just pull back on it and you can actually see that mechanism. Pull back. Something we've been wondering about is if this piece is actually the right one for this truck. So when we put it in, you can see that most of these bolt holes line up where they're supposed to, here and then across the radiator cradle. The only thing that's a little odd is if you move this out of the way, you can see there's 4 threaded inserts here, 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 and here, where this is supposed to bolt into. But when you put this on here, only 2 holes exist, and they line up okay, but these 2 holes are not there at all, which is a little odd. This was brought to us, to us before we actually bought the truck. So you can see, we're not 100% sure if this is the right one. I don't know if this was for a couple years older of this truck or something, and maybe they changed this design and put 4 bolts here. We're gonna see if we can make this work. This whole assembly, if you had to buy this and the latch and everything, if you bought the stainless one, it's like 450 bucks. The black one is 220 or 230, something like that. So it's pretty big expense that we don't really want to put into just this. So if we can make this one work, we'll make it work, but we'll just have to see. What are you working on?
The filler panels for the backs of the front fenders.
Well, he's working on that. So these some of the parts that we got. I told you guys a few minutes ago. This is the tail light bracket for the back of the truck. Tail light, of course, is on the back of the truck, and then this is the actual tail light itself. So this gets bolted in place here. The new lights actually come with a harness too, so that just plugs right in. It already has a connection here for power and ground, so that's pretty cool. This pushes up onto that, keeps everything watertight out here on the end, so pretty nice. Let's go see what this looks like on the truck. I haven't actually put it on the truck yet. I just bolted the light up to it. This should be the right hand side. And it should, let's see here. Where does it go? That's the question. Oh, appears to go on the back over here. There's a couple of bolts already here. Looks like it's gonna go kind of like that. See if I can get this lined up. There we go. So it is at an angle. I was a little concerned when I first bolted it up. So you look at it like this, bracket straight, and then that light sitting crooked. But the actual bolt pattern here, for this bolt, this hole and this bolt here, which is where it would bolt into, has it to where it lines up pretty well and then flattens that light out straight. So it looks pretty good. So the decision was made that we needed to cut that off, and he's going to extend it up so that that filter will sit somewhere right above those rods that go back to the firewall. So what's your plan since you cut that off? What are you going to do to fix it?
I'm going some way to reattach this back to the two threaded inserts I've got in the inner fender and attach it back to here at the correct angle to make it clear the braces.
Gotcha. So you're going to bolt that back on and then stick this back where it kind of needs to go and then make a piece to bridge the two?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking at this as I go.
So this is kind of cool. We hadn't seen this here before. This is the kind of the upgraded mass airflow sensor. It was for an LS3 for a Corvette is kind of what these came out of. Instead of the big bulky, and I can actually run over here and grab it real quick. The big bulky mass airflow sensors that came on these trucks, or came on this engine for these trucks. See if I can find it real quick. Or one of them. I don't think this is actually the one that was on the truck. This is another one that we had gotten before. But you can see how big and bulky and not as good as that one that these are. So it's nice because it replaces that. It replaces it with that, basically that screw and bung that is in the tube here. Let's see real quick. So that's it. So that screws into that bezel, which Dad cut and welded this piece into the tube. And then that sensor scoots down in here and you attach it with those two bolts. So cleans everything up really nice and gives you a better mass airflow sensor. So this is directional. So you can see the flow is actually marked on there. So that's important because this will only go in one direction. So actually, whenever we first did it, we first got done, we thought it was upside down. But luckily it wasn't. So I went ahead and got the tail lights bolted in place here. So you can see kind of how they set off. Pretty level. Might need to adjust it a little. It still looks, if you use these bolts as a reference, it still looks like this is kind of setting up a little. So probably need to, there's a little slop in the holes for the light itself and a little slop in the bracket itself, and between those two I should have enough to get that straight on. I want to make sure that gets straight on. Same thing over here. Now this one's actually the opposite. If if you look at it, this one's sitting a little lower than this side, so we'll need to raise this up and then rotate the light a little. So, but yeah, the other thing that I got for this truck was a license plate holder, and it's over there on the table. But basically, it's supposed to mount right here, and it comes down in an L shape and has a light sitting here. So the Ron Francis kit come with a ground for the light, and it comes with a the power side, 12 volts for that light also to one of these wires. And so I'd like to wanted to put that on here, but now I'm kind of questioning it a little because you can see these holes were in the truck just to bolt the license plate directly to it. They would probably look a little nicer, but we wouldn't have a light for the license plate. So I have to figure that out, figure out what we're going to do for that. It actually worked out pretty good for this, because whenever we had this in here, we had that single brace, this thing was pretty, it would move around quite a bit. So it had a lot of slop in it that would let it flex. And then, so what Dad's done here is, like we talked about earlier, he mounted this brace back onto the fender, and he left that piece that he'd cut off that was already welded to the pipe on here. And he's taken two pieces, and he's basically sandwiched this lower piece and the piece that's stuck off the tube, and he's gonna take that and then he'll weld these on here and make this basically a double rigid piece. And it's gonna take the flex out of this piece, as well as let the filter sit right here slightly above this rod and clearance everything. So it's gonna work out really good. So I have the connectors ready to wire in that guy finally. I know I said I was gonna do that last time, but I didn't. So time to get to work on the dome light. So now, dome light's back in. Looks like it has been there all its life, which it basically has, except for a nice new wire that's not really rigid and terrible like the one that was there. So I talked about last time how we were going to extend this up so that this intake tube will clear the rods that go back to the firewall. So you can see here the pieces. This is the original bottom mount. It's run here in the center, and the original mount that was welded to the tube. So for two reasons: to make this much more stiff and so that we can extend it. Dad's taking these two pieces, sandwich the original pieces together, and he's going to weld this up. And weld these up and make sure that this stays a lot more rigid. Like I said, it's pretty crazy how much difference it made just having these two pieces there instead of just the one. So what do you think?
I think I'll get it finished well, and I think it'll be okay.
Cool. So what Dad's using here is called a TIG welder. TIG stands for tungsten inert gas. One of the things that's changed about this machine recently, he's had this Miller machine for, I don't know, probably what, 8 or 10 years, Dad, at this point, that you've had this Miller machine? 5 years, okay. So he's had it for about 5 years, but for Christmas, my sister and I, we went in together and bought him a finger controller for it. So these welders come, normally you see a lot of these guys using the foot pedal. This foot pedal here controls the amperage that the welder's using, and so this is replaced. As you press this, it puts more amperage, and if you let off, it uses less. This plugs into the machine. This is replaced by this controller box here. So this is from tigcontrol.com. It's like 6061.com is actually the website that we used. This controller goes on here, gets grounded into the welder itself, and then we also just grounded it for extra precaution into the cart. So with that ground being there, all the wires being here, this runs down the sheath of the of the torch here, and you can see that instead of having that foot pedal, it has this button here. So as he presses on that button, it increases amperage, or if he lets off of it, it decreases it. So you can see it changes it changes a lot. You don't have to have that foot pedal, so you can get in a lot tighter spaces. You don't have to. There's been times where Dad's had to get into a place and I've had to hold or press the foot pedal myself to control it for him because he was in a place where he couldn't work it. So using that, it gives you a lot more options on where and how and what you can weld. So pretty neat little deal, and that's 6061.com is where you can get those. Really nice. You can tell it's a product made by welders for welders. You keep it up, you might make a welder one day.
I doubt it.
So now he's got both sides of this welded up, so you can see, like I said, how much more solid, how much more rigid everything is. So it's gonna make it look really nice. So while Dad finishes getting that tube welded up, I wanted to show you guys something that I'd got wrapped up here. So when you're doing the LS's with these classic instrument gauges, they actually request that you take this fitting off. This is right here where the oil fitting goes, or where the oil filter goes. So this is going to give you a really good and true oil pressure. So you have to take this off, this housing off, and actually drill and tap it with a pipe tap, and then you put this assembly in, this extension, this elbow, and then this is the sending unit for the oil pressure itself. So I followed this knock sensor wire here down and then bridged over here to that. So all of this will get tied up and cleaned up. Make sure it stays away from the exhaust. You can see that we really need as much space as we possibly can get in this truck. So with the exhaust manifolds and then the exhaust being here, this will probably get bridged over here to this brake line or something, tied up in a way, zip tied up in a way, and make sure that stays up and off of that exhaust. But like I said, we're really in a truck that is this age, and kind of what we're trying to do with it, you have to make every square inch count. So I'm over here on the passenger side of the truck now, so you can see here's the starter, oil pan for reference, and then like I said, we're over here on the passenger side. Something that we wanted to do with this is there's a lot of stuff that goes off of, so the battery cable will actually go right here to this post on the starter. The battery itself is actually mounted in the floorboard of the truck. So you can see that you can pretty quickly run out of space once you put a positive battery cable here and things like that. You start stacking onto this, you can pretty quickly run out of space on this. So one thing that we wanted to do, since we knew with all the other electronics and things that we were going to be running, we put a post here. So what we'll do is I'm going to take a pretty heavy gauge wire, and I'll put one wire and jump it from this post over to this big battery post. This again is from Ron Francis. This is kind of what these are made to do. So we've got this. That will be our, basically, call it just our extra battery post. So once you'll have a constant battery feed to this post. Since it's jumped over here, you'll have a constant battery feed here also. On top of that, I talked to you guys the other day about grounds and how important they are to all of this. So we kind of go out of our way to put as many on here as we possibly can. So you can see right here, Ron Francis recommends putting any grounds, and they'll actually be, the negative battery cable will be here under this starter bolt as well. This is to make sure that the negative battery cable is grounded to the block of the engine. This, like I said, really helps to make sure that you have a really good ground no matter where you are. So the negative battery cable will go here. You can see this is a braided ground strap, and it is run to this post. This post right, oh, can't get my hand in there. This post right there. So we're gonna have a ground strap from this directly to there to make sure that we have a good solid ground to everything. This big wire, this large diameter wire that we have here, that's gonna be run up and inside the cab to that ground strip that you've seen while we were working on the gauges. The other two things that we have off this post is actually a bundle of grounds, so it's gonna go forward. That's gonna be the grounds for all our headlights, for our for the electric fan, for all of that stuff. All of those wires come off that bundle, and then there's another heavy gauge wire run toward the back of the truck. In the back of the truck, there's actually another one of these posts. It's a copper threaded post. That's going to be back there. All of the tail lights, all of the turn signals, fuel pump, sending unit, all of that stuff is grounded off of that post. So basically you have a chain, a circuit basically of ground that originates at the block of the engine to make sure that you have the best ground possible. Starts here, runs forward, so everything forward is grounded off of that, everything in the rear is grounded off of that, and anything in the cab is grounded off of that. So we've taken as many precautions as we possibly can to make sure that everything has the best ground that it can get, as well as the best positive feed that it can possibly get. So we don't have any sort of floating grounds, we don't have any ghost lights that we're trying to troubleshoot. If you try and take these precautions, I don't know for a fact yet because it's not done, if you take these precautions, you can at least eliminate some troubleshooting or make your troubleshooting as easy as possible for whenever we do start this and we start driving it if we have any issues. We have Dad admiring his work here. So you got this back in place, you got everything cinched back up. So you can see that gap's no longer there, everything's bolted down into the threaded inserts. This is way more rigid, not as much flex into it at all. You know, if I'm sitting here pulling on it, there's going to be flex force, but if you're going down the road, it's not going to flex at all. And you can see we have a good probably inch of clearance over this rod. And any distance you can get this air filter away from the engine, it's that much cooler air that you're going to be pulling in. So I think it's going to end up being a lot better. And got clearance on everything and tightened up.
I guess we'll talk a little bit about front end alignment and rear end alignment. We're kind of backing into this. We're starting late on the documenting what's been done to this thing. But what I do, we changed the rear end. I had to make the spring perches on the axle housing. So got those lined up, checked a diagonal measurement, center line of the chassis, and I will, at that time I cinched the brake rotor up on the axle, and I'll lay a straight edge across the brake rotor. And this was, back up just a little bit further, this was done before the bed, the running boards, and the front clip was even on it. I actually did this with the engine out, so all this was stripped off the sides, if you can picture that. I set a laser up behind this, I run down a straight edge on the rear brake rotor and make sure that the rear end is square with the chassis. And I just project that laser off this measurement here, I project that laser to the front, and I go do the same thing on the brake rotor to the front. I center the steering, we center up the steering in the center of the travel, lock to lock. Put that dead center, square up the wheel, and then I set one side of this so that it's dead in line with the rear end, with a straight line on the rear end. And then I just set my toe, and again, this is all done with all this off of it. The engine was out of it, just the front, upper and lower control arm, the brake rotor, and I can line it up. The other thing that I do that I can do, it's real easy to do without the front clip on it, without any springs or anything on it. If you try to do this with the springs on it, you'd have to simulate the weight and get the truck to ride height. So what I end up doing is making, I don't know if you can see them or not, but I substitute where the shocks bolt with a stiff knee, which is just a solid piece of tubing that goes in place of the shock. And what Heights wants you to do is work off the level lower control arm. You run the lower control arms out so they're parallel with the ground, just level, and then you can set everything else off that. I just use an angle finder to set the caster. I put a tick more caster in the fronts that Heights recommends, and then the other adjustments, all the other adjustments, the lower control arm's all fixed. All the other adjustments, the caster and the camber, is done with the upper control arm, and there's slotted holes on this mount, the crossmember mount, and you can move that upper control arm, pivot it toward the back, and pull it in and out to get the caster and the camber. I put just a tick more caster in these front ends is what they call for, and it makes them real stable. They're really stable. I also check the toe in, and it's easy to do. You can easily do that with a straight edge with the front clip and the engine out of it. It's easy to project a line front and rear to set up the toe in. So that's basically what I do. That's kind of I guess a Reader's Digest version, but that's what we do and try to get the front end in alignment. They drive real well. The other thing that I've checked on a lot of these front ends, and I think I checked it on this one, is the bump steer. And these front ends, they've kept the geometry down to the point that there is absolutely a minimum amount of bump steer on these front ends. All the way through the travel course, as low as we've got these trucks set, there's not a huge amount of suspension travel, but through that entire amount of travel, this thing won't have more than about an eighth of an inch total bump steer from the absolute bottom of the stroke to the top of the stroke on the suspension travel. So they seem to work pretty good. One other thing that I add that don't come in the kit that I've learned is the sway bar. Front sway bar on these things makes a huge difference. These trucks are kind of top heavy. The old cabs are pretty tall, and the sway bar, I have run them. We put the front ends under them and ran them a few miles without the sway bar, and then install the sway bar, and it does make an incredible amount of difference. They're much more, they set much more level, they handle considerably better. Of course, these are not the best handling vehicles in the world, but it's no Corvette by any means, but it handles substantially better with the sway bar than it does without it. So just a little overview.
So I think that's going to do it for this episode of Shift Points. We talked about all the things that we talked about. I think next time we should have the hoses and the fittings ready to get the radiator mocked up. I'm going to talk to you guys about the battery cables that we ordered and kind of why we order those. We're going to get those routed, and we are like, as far as the electrical work goes of getting this engine fired, we are so close. So the electrical side's almost wrapped up. We'll try and get that done next time. Have the fuel system kind of wrapped up, and the plan is to start it how it sets like this, with the fuel cell sitting in the floor, so we can go over everything, check, make sure there's no leaks, and make sure all the electrical stuff's working how it's supposed to. Also, make sure to follow us at Shift Points on Facebook and Instagram, and then make sure that you comment about anything that you liked or didn't like about this video, and make sure to subscribe. That really makes a difference and really helps us out. So thanks for joining Shift Points.